Well, hello there, and welcome to another ACA podcast. And this one's very serious. You know that this is very serious because I'm wearing a tie. um, I'm Billy Hoffman.
I'm Steven Smith.
All right, so we've been going over the ACA Laundry List, ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunction. And we've gone through, several traits. We've gone all the way through 10.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm here to tell you folks, 11 and 12 are humdingers, which is a clinical term, by the way.
Yes, it's straight out of the text.
They are humdingers. Do you want to go over it a little bit?
Yeah, sure. The traits or the list as a whole?
The traits.
Yeah. So before we get into traits 11, I think we always start these podcasts by saying, if by chance this is your first one of these podcasts, this has been a series, so I'd encourage you to jump back in the catalog a couple episodes. You can listen to the previous traits that we've done, and we're going to be talking about traits 11 and 12 today on the laundry list, doing a deeper dive on those.
All right. Let's go to 11.
Let's start with 11.
And the laundry list says this: we judge ourselves harshly and have a very low sense of self-esteem, which I'm here to tell you personally, I had experienced that.
Yeah. Do you mind sharing a little more about what that was like for you over the years?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm glad you said over the years, because, I mean, this is a lifetime of this.
Yeah.
Up until, and I can't even say up until I got into recovery. It was years into recovery that this part of it started to get better for me. But yeah, very self-critical of myself from the time I was, a little kid, whether it was critical of, my weight or what I was doing, who liked me or who didn't like me, hyper focus on, what do I need to do in this or that situation? And I definitely held myself to a higher standard, or so I put more pressure on myself.
Sure. How much of that, as you work through this, or maybe looking back now, how much of that do you feel like was a result of things you experienced in your childhood and your household?
All of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I believe all of it. Some of the things I've shared in this podcast, the things like the one very positive thing that I ever heard my father say, that I was a good singer, was that. And so that plays into, I need to be good at certain things. And this is how, that's the thing my dad likes now. And then he goes away, so now I'm just left with myself to criticize the things that I do, watching other family members that were hyper focused. And, so I'm born in 71. So like late 70s and early 80s and that kind of thing. There's this whole like weight loss movement. You've got people like the Richard Simmons and Olivia Newton-John is, having hits on the radio, but she's also like doing a thing. And then Jane Fonda, all this stuff. What that resulted in for my mother was like daily weigh-ins kind of thing. So that hyper sensitivity to that, I think I picked up on that as well.
Yeah, that's I think a very interesting example. Like when I was going to talk this trait, I was going to talk about how, our relationships with ourselves and how, whether we're self-critical or self-judgmental, like the trait's talking about, can be affected a lot by our interactions with other people. But I was also going to talk about how, there's kind of broader cultural messages and social messages that can all influence what we think we're supposed to be like. But it's kind of interesting for you to talk about how, there's this cultural norms of this weight loss movement, but those things are, influencing your mother, and then that's also influencing how she's treating you. So they're all kind of wrapped up together.
Yeah, and it influenced how I perceived what life was, some of the more important things.
Yeah. Yeah. So with trait 11, like being self-critical, judgmental, whatever we want to call it. I mean, I think there are a lot of people who can relate to this. And I certainly have gotten a lot of questions in these groups, like, well, if I am self-critical, does that mean it has to come from childhood? And I mean, no, not everything does. Speaking to what I think the laundry list is kind of referring to here, because we're talking about adult children of alcoholics and dysfunction. I think this can look a few ways. So remember some helpful questions to ask are like, who did this to me, or who did I see do this? So if I am very self-critical, self-judgmental, who did this to me? I might ask myself. And sometimes it's a pretty easy answer. Like I may have had a caregiver who was pretty overtly critical of me, put me down a lot, called me names, or even made comments like, this is what you're good at. You're never going to do anything past it. You're going to amount to anything, making like lots of statements about my potential as a person. And then I think we've talked about this actually in some previous podcast episodes where we talked about criticism. But then there's also ways where I think this can be communicated sort of passively, or maybe like passive aggressively in a way. So maybe I didn't have a parent who was overtly judgmental of me, but every time I tried to perform or do something, they like didn't care at all, or maybe they picked at the few things that I didn't do well. And so that people can internalize that. So they adopt that sort of critical stance that was put on them. And now that's how I begin to see myself. So now as I get older, I'm going to be basically harder on myself than anyone else could possibly be on me. I'm going to beat them to the punch in a way. And I think that there's a little bit of control that goes on with that. Like I would prefer to be harsh on myself than to sort of be vulnerable and exposed to someone else.
Well, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to head everyone off at the pass.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that I get it right so I don't have to deal with, and then again, going back to other things I've shared with you and some of these other traits, I don't want the conflict that could come with that. I don't want the bad feelings that could come with that. You mentioned like the name calling, like, I can remember even in school, as a little guy, I was, just like I am now. I'm gregarious and fun and that kind of stuff. But what would happen is, some of the kids would say things like, Big Billy or Fat Boy or whatever, and that really plugged into this thing, that I had going on with the societal norms, as you say. And it was a big deal to me. And in fact, in seventh grade, yeah, it was seventh grade, I decided I was going to count calories. My mother had an album, a Richard Simmons album called, I think, Wake Up and Reach. And I listened to that thing every day, did the exercises every day, counted calories, and got down to like what they would consider normal weight, and stayed there all the way through high school and early adulthood and kind of thing. But it was I can still remember, don't cook for two when there's only you.
Wow. This stuff stays in.
Yeah. Oh man, there's a lot of little songs. Yeah.
If I can ask, like, do you remember at that time when you were doing that, did that improve your relationship with yourself, or did you feel better about yourself during those times?
Oh, I think I did feel better about myself. I did.
Yeah. And I imagine there was a lot of other like positive reinforcement, like your mother saying, like,
oh yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, there's that. And then of course, there's girlfriends.
Sure.
I mean, that helps.
Yeah. And that kind of systematic can involve this belief of like, well, when I do good or when I look good, then I am good.
Yeah.
And then when I do not do good or when I don't feel like I look good, then I'm bad. And yeah, I think this trait also, Trade 11 is really kind of talking about how we attach our like self-worth and sense of self-esteem to these like external things too. It can be very harsh in judging ourselves along that. There's a concept too that we usually talk about in the groups about like the hero of the family too, that I think comes up with Trade 11. So, in the sort of literature, the hero is the kind of like sometimes the golden child of the family, is the one who's on the surface level has it all together, or maybe makes it out of a bad situation in the family. And Trade 11 often will talk about how, even people that were high achieving despite the dysfunction can still really harbor a lot of these feelings of inadequacy or low self-worth. And often I think those people feel a large sense of pressure on themselves and a sense of responsibility for what was going on in the household. So they may feel like they have to perform so that like no more dysfunction happens. And then if they're not performing, now they think, I'm not doing good enough, not good enough. Things are all going to go wrong. So there's sometimes I think can be a connection to that.
Well, the hero piece I relate to a lot. Sadly, like when I look back on that piece, like the self-centeredness was so thick, probably as a protective mechanism, that the hero that I was playing was not, I want to save my family, was I want to be somebody, save myself, and be the man.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it was like a self-preservation. Like,
Yeah, it was.
yeah, which I think is a pretty natural response. It's the alternatives to these feelings are, I'm gonna feel like I'm nothing.
Yeah, that's right.
Sure.
And the other pressure, and this went on for years and years, Stephen. So I told you about the singing, and so again, I'm in this heyday of music too. We got the '80s that are just rolling. You've got all these big artists: Bruce Springsteen, Lionel Richie, We Are the World, USA for Africa. All this stuff is going on, and that's one of my goals. I'm thinking, I'm going to be a performer. That's what I'm going to do. And that kind of thought process led me to feel like I needed to always be writing songs. I mean, no joke. And so, like, I would write songs and write songs and write songs and write songs. I did that for years and years. I felt a pressure to do that.
Yeah, I imagine like a pressure from within yourself. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people who relate to Trade 11 describe themselves as like being someone who can put more pressure on themselves than anyone else could possibly. And yeah, I think it's very interesting how a lot of this stuff will start outside of us, like from external sources, but we kind of internalize it over time and then we run with it. And but the good news is because we've internalized it, that means like that's where we can make changes in the recovery side.
Well, I mean, that truthfully, you could see just from how I operate, like around here. It's one of the reasons why I hang out in external for so long, because I know how to bring people in from the external into the internal, and it takes time, like for them to like. There's a difference in me saying, hey, look at this concept. What do you think? And you go, yeah. But there's another difference in we take the time to let it simmer and cook, and you kind of get it.
Yeah.
Actually, there's a difference in it, and that's just from my personal experience with a lot of these things.
Sure.
Do we need to move on to 12? I think we do.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah,
Let's do that.
Yeah, if we're gonna be on time, folks, we need to do this. 12, laundry list. We are dependent personalities who are terrified of abandonment and will do anything to hold on to a relationship in order not to experience painful abandonment feelings, which we receive from living with sick people who were never there emotionally for us.
Big one. Humdinger.
That's a humdinger.
Humdinger, right?
That's a humdinger right there.
Yeah. Trait 12, and in a second, I think we talk about the other side of trait 12 too, because I think those two really go hand in hand. But we're firmly in the realms here of like relational issues, attachment challenges, and the laundry list side here is talking about a real like anxiety in relationships, this fear of abandonment, fear of being left, fear of being alone comes up here. And the origins of this one, as we kind of think about it, usually come from the fact that we had caregivers or people in our life, in our childhood, who were not there for us. See, whether this was inconsistent, like sometimes they were there, but then sometimes they weren't, or they were there and one day they up and left and they disappeared from my life, or they were never there at all. Any sense that like I'm going to be left, especially in early childhood, is pretty serious. Like I try to always encourage people to think about these traits, through the eyes of like, even like a 5 or 6 year old. Well, yeah, a 5 or 6 year old doesn't even really know for the most part how to like make their own meals, take care of them. So having a caregiver who is, 1, physically around, and then 2, functionally capable enough to actually take care of us, like, is a survival need. It's a pretty important one. So there's going to be a lot of fear when people leave or are not available. I might have had fear like, how am I going to figure this out? I come home and no one's in the house, or dad's passed out in the bed and I don't know what I'm going to do for dinner. Or even just like, are they going to show up to this thing to pick me up? Am I going to have to find my way home? Like, you can imagine all those really scary situations that would come up for a kid, especially a young kid in that. So I think sometimes that's where the fear can start. And then it tends to take on a life of its own over time. And so people who relate to the laundry list side of trait 12 will usually find themselves being what we can call in the therapy context, like the pursuer in the relationship, the one who says, don't leave me, don't leave me. I'm going to, check all the time. I'm going to maybe try to call you a lot of times a day. I'm going to have this feeling of anxiety. Are you mad at me? Do you hate me? Please don't leave me. That kind of energy is the laundry list side that people usually bring to the table.
Yeah. And I brought a lot of that to my table as well. The fear of someone cheating on me, which would result in, leaving me, them feeling like someone, was a better fit than myself or whatever it was in terms of the relationship, but the, golly, so many times when I think of the amount of intense feelings that came around so many relationships in my life, I don't even know how I have a nervous system. I'm serious.
Yeah.
Like I don't even know because the the feelings were just so intense. Felt like the only way they could be harnessed and contained was for whatever it was that I thought was the best result, was for that to happen.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's a good advert for people at home that nervous systems can recover.
Yeah. Oh, yes, they can. They can come back around. They can. And Stephen will tell you, I'm a huge fan of the cold water therapy of any kind, cold showers, all that stuff, and that's parasympathetic nervous system, which really helps with
Keeping you calm.
keeping you calm, keeping you cool and collected, and all those things that they say.
So one other thing I want to kind of highlight is that the last sentence where I think it says like, we'll find ourselves doing whatever we can to make others stay, or something to that effect. I think is another behavior where this can show up and cause problems in people's lives. So sometimes if I'm so terrified of abandonment in my relationships, I stay in relationships that are unhealthy for me far longer than I should. Or like when people are actively mistreating me, or crossing boundaries, disrespecting me, harming me. But because I'm so terrified of being alone, that's scarier to me than the idea of like an unhealthy relationship. That can be one. But also there can be this like, I do whatever I can to manipulate them to stay too. So
Oh, I got both of those. You know, you've done both. Fancy, easy.
yeah, and it can be like, I create narratives and lies. I put them down as a way to try to get them to come back to me. I pit someone else against them to try to get them to come to me. I mean, there's all sorts of these ways that this could go. And a lot of times people who are doing that, they're doing it from a place of fear of being left, and then either actively or maybe even after the fact are feeling really bad about it. Like they don't feel good about the manipulation necessarily. I don't think it's a good thing to do, but it's like I can't stop myself because I can't bear the idea of being left.
Yeah, the thing that I could never figure out was, so on the one hand, I can't bear to have you leave me. But the second that I'm able to manipulate, smooth the waters and all of that, and you're still there and you're not going anywhere, well, then I take off doing my addiction stuff. You know what I mean? I literally just said I can't live without you. And as soon as I know that the smoke is cleared, I'm out doing my thing.
Yeah, well, I think part of that is like it's like the relationship is almost at that point not about the other person. It's just about giving us a sense of security that I'm not going to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
And once that has been had, now I don't have the fear of being left. Then I can go do whatever.
Yeah. And this is probably part of like one of my narcissistic traits, say, but I know for a fact with so many relationships, this fear and wanting to hold on to them, not letting them go, was more about me not wanting them to be with someone else.
Mm.
I didn't want to be alone. That is true. But I also didn't want them to be with someone else.
Because if they were with someone else, what would that mean about you?
That would mean that I wasn't that great.
That I was
Right. So it's still that same kind of rejection, abandonment, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I really appreciate sharing that because I do think a lot of people say like I have this fear of being alone. But if we dig a little deeper, like, what is it so wrong about being alone? Because there are plenty of people who do a lot of healing work, and being physically alone, no problem at all, right? But the idea of like someone else being chosen over me, like I feel like it says something about my self-worth. Yeah. Let's read the other side for trait 12 too.
We manage the massive amount of deprivation we feel, coming from abandonment within the home, by quickly letting go of relationships that threaten our independence, not too close.
Yeah. So that
I've met some of those folks.
Sure. If the first one we just read a second ago is the fear of abandonment side, this is the fear of closeness or fear of intimacy. So, and I think what often this looks like is what it says in the trait. Like I may see a pattern in my life where I get into relationships, I'm with them for a little while, and then at some point I just duck out and I break up with them, or I do something so that they'll break up with me, or I just ghost them and I disappear from their life and I don't want to talk to them anymore. People who relate to this trait might see patterns like that in their relationships. They might even see a pattern that says, I've never been a committed relationship for much longer than a year. Maybe all my relationships are less than a year long. Or I've never been committed serious relationship. So those are some flags that people might be able to recognize. This is essentially a different version of a protective factor for kind of some of the same things we're talking about in the first part of trait 12. So if I'm afraid of being left, I could, on the laundry list side, do whatever I can to make sure that no one ever leaves me ever again. Or I could say, I'm never going to let anyone get close enough to me so that it would really actually hurt me all that much if they left.
Yeah.
And that's really what this side, the other laundry list side, is talking about. I keep people at a distance. I don't go too deep. And the patterns that I was describing a second ago, I think usually come up because all human beings, like we all have a need for us to have some independence, and we do absolutely need connection with other people. Like that's how this species has evolved. So if I try to live my whole life alone, at some point, even the most solitude, filled people you can imagine will have a thought of like, oh, I kind of want to be around other people or have a close relationship. So then they start to inch closer to it, and then they inch closer to it, and then the fear comes back. And so then that's when I push away, I self-sabotage, do whatever I need to stop the closeness.
Great episode, Stephen.
Yeah.
I'd say this is a great one. So just remember, folks, when you see the Gen X guy in a tie, it's a serious episode.
They a humdinger.
Yeah, a humdinger. That's right. And truly, they've all been very serious. I mean, this ACA material. If you are really curious about some of the things that have gone on for you emotionally in your life, learn more about this, because these laundry list traits could be at the root of some of what you have going on.
Yeah, go check out ACA meetings, online or in person. And I think, as we've shared on other episodes, if you want to read the actual laundry list we've been reading and referencing, you can go to adultchildren.org is their official website. You can find all their literature for free there and take a look at it yourself.
All right, and we'll see you next time on the ACA podcast.